The Kalb Report is funded by a grant from the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation. From the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., this is the Kalb Report with Marvin Kalb.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club and to another edition of the Kalb Report. I'm Marvin Kalb. Down to the wire, journalism in crisis. That's what we're calling our program tonight. Now, a couple of years ago, I would have said that that title was hyped. No longer. Journalism is in crisis. What do these major newspapers have in common? The Chicago Tribune, the LA Times, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, the Philadelphia Inquirer. They're all in a state of bankruptcy. The Rocky Mountain News shut down, as have 120 other American newspapers in the last year. The San Francisco Chronicle loses an estimated $1 million a week. How long can it go on? The Christian Science Monitor folded up and has gone online, as have many other American newspapers. Job cuts, a cutting indicator of the health of any industry. So far, 300 reporters and editors have been cut from the LA Times, 205 from the Miami Herald, 156 from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, 150 from the Kansas City Star. I could go on, but you get the idea. This is an industry in serious trouble. What are the problems and what can be done about them? We are delighted, honored in fact, to have four panelists who've been thinking very hard about these very questions. They may have some answers for us. To my left, a matter of geography only, Jonathan Klein, he's president of CNN in the United States, has had the job since November 2004. Before that, he founded feedroom.com, a New York City online media company. Before that, he was executive vice president of CBS News. To my right, Tom Curley, president and chief executive officer of the Associated Press since 2003. Before that, he was president and publisher of USA Today. Again, to my left, Alberto Ibargüen, president and CEO of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which deals principally with the media. Before that, he was publisher of the Miami Herald and El Nuevo Herald. And to my right, Vivian Schiller, the president and CEO of NPR, National Public Radio. Before that, she was senior vice president and general manager of NewYorkTimes.com. Okay, the easy part of the program is over. What specifically can be done to save American journalism, or if we are not being too apocalyptic, to ease the serious problems now besetting this industry? And let's start by identifying the problems. And John Klein, I want to start with you. From your standpoint, running CNN, what is the single most important problem that you face today?
Roger Ailes. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. Now my PR people are going to be angry at me for. I love Roger as a person. I'm being facetious. Just speaking about systemic business issues, right this moment, the problem is the uncertainty about what revenues are going to be. We know where they're going to come from. We have two streams of revenue, so we're fortunate in that respect. But I think the real challenge is the supply of future journalists, making sure that they come our way. Because I have no doubt that there are going to continue to be people who want to practice journalism. But the crisis you're speaking of is really one of the business models in crisis. Those are clearly changing. We're never going to have a shortage of folks who want to find things out and want to tell others about them, and we're not going to have a shortage of people who want to know what's going on. So in that sense, we're all pretty well positioned. We just have to figure out how to take advantage of that.
Tom Curley, in your view, the single most important problem?
Well, it's revenue. There's no question. It's revenue and where it's going and how to get it and how to hold on to it. The market for news is growing. More people are seeking content more times a day in more countries than ever before. This is not about a declining market. This is about a growing market. The problem is the revenue is going in different directions.
Alberto Ibargüen, your view?
I agree that the immediate problem with the business model is definitely revenue. But I think the bigger conceptual issue, and the one that's very, very hard if you come from a traditional media to try to figure out what's going on, what's going to happen next, is the psychological shift of a news consumer to a news user. The people who used to sit and read the newspaper or watch TV really were from an I write, you read, or you write, I read, had that kind of a mentality. You receive the information. The consumer now, the user of information, I think in the next generation, expects to be able to use that, expects to be able to either participate in the information, in the discussion of it, use it in some interactive way. I think that goes both for news content as well as news advertising, and that's why I think banner ads tend to be less successful than ads that actually allow you to do something about it. It's news consumers to news users.
Vivian Schiller, point of view of NPR, the most serious problem.
Right. Well, my first top three answers were already taken, which are revenue, revenue, and revenue. So I'll move on to number four, which is revenue. It is revenue, but on top of that, I would say, just to add a little something different into the conversation, is something that Alberto was starting to get at, which is how do we take, we represent some pretty strong brands and some very successful audience stories. In the case of NPR, still very, very strong listening audience. How do we, knowing that audience, especially in the generation coming up, is using media in a different way, how do we create that same satisfying, in our case, NPR experience for them so that they continue to stay with us across all platforms?
Okay, if we've isolated the revenue problem, again, starting with John Klein, how would you solve that?
Well, we're fortunate in that we do have multiple revenue streams, and they're as strong as they've ever been. I mean,
even in the current market?
We've had 5 straight years of double-digit profit growth. Double-digit growth in profit over the past 5 years. And yes, like everybody, we're going to take a hit this year, but we think that we're better insulated against that because of the multiple revenue streams and because we're able to sell successfully across platforms. So we, several years ago, began selling television bundled with the internet. We're able to do that because we've got 73 million viewers watching us on television, but also 36 million unique users online, and that's a nice big chunk of an audience, and that gives us some sway in the marketplace.
So it sounds to me like you are not at CNN deeply concerned about what is happening now?
We're very careful about the cost side because when you don't know exactly where the revenues are going to turn out, you've got to be cautious. So we're being prudent, but we're happy with where we are. We're not in a panic mode.
Okay, Tom Curley, how do you handle it?
The most important thing we have to face is that the business model for print for the last century is gone. And that is that we've relied on advertisers to subsidize the readers or the viewers. We really have to take a page out of cable and CNN and get more money, more revenue from subscribers, from users and viewers. And that is the big change. There's another piece of this. The advertising experience that we've all been through for much of the last century also is changing. It is much easier to target using modern technology, and that's another big piece of the adjustment we have to make. And for many of us coming from traditional organizations, we are either at the beginning or behind the curve in understanding how to target and how to apply some of those new tools. And we have to get a lot smarter about that a lot faster.
Alberto.
I'm the only one of the three of your four guests
You don't have to worry about that.
that doesn't run a news organization, and so I don't. While I agree about revenue, I'm not so much concerned about it on a daily basis as I am in thinking about how you deliver news and information to communities in an effective and shared way 5, 10, 15 years from now. And I think you need to begin now thinking in a fundamentally different way than I write, you read. You need to start thinking in a way that uses the web in the democratic way that the best of web technology allows you to do. I think this is a time for experimentation. And that's exactly, if you want to talk about it later, but that's exactly what we've been doing at Knight Foundation. I think we need to encourage the kind of thinking that Tom just suggested. We should think about news as a utility. That's basically what you're saying, that you pay the light bill, you pay the cable bill, maybe you pay a news bill, I don't know. But we ought to have all of these things on the table and stop trying to figure out how do we get back to 1970.
Vivian.
Well, we really have 5 major revenue streams at NPR, and some of them are doing pretty well and others are suffering. Our main revenue stream comes from license fees and membership dues from our member stations. They are in large part supported by listeners like you. That's actually, I encourage all of you to support your local public radio station. That's actually doing pretty well. I think people understand that now more than ever people need to support their local public radio station. So that's doing pretty well. Our next biggest revenue stream is underwriting and sponsorship, and that's being hammered just like advertising is for all legacy media. So that's suffering. I'll make no bones about it. We have grants from foundations, including from Alberto's, and we're very grateful for that help support what we do. We have major donors, major gifts that give to the NPR Foundation. And we have investment earnings, which are really suffering. So the two, and there's a misperception that we get government, a lot of money from the government. Actually, less than 1% of our funding comes from CPB through the government. But between investment earnings and sponsorship, we're taking a pretty big hit there.
But what can you do about it?
What we can do is, well, we believe because we don't have an audience problem, we have a revenue problem. I believe that the investment piece of this will come back. We have to tighten our belt temporarily. And in terms of sponsorship and underwriting, first of all, we need to bolster our other revenue streams, and we need to think a little bit differently about how we go about that part of the business.
John Klein, I am told that you have started something which is an equivalent to a wire service, or you're in the midst of that kind of an adventure. Tell us how you're doing in that respect and why you're doing it.
We're always exploring new ways to make money and looking at the needs in the marketplace. Now, one thing we're not trying to do is replicate the Associated Press. We couldn't match the vast reach and the far corners of the earth that they can touch and the expertise. However, there may be certain areas in which we can provide services to newspapers, TV stations especially have been interested, radio stations.
The newspapers.
Well, but we want to see whether what we turn out in our way in the course of doing our business, because we've got 800 local affiliates around the country. We've got bureaus all over the world. We've got people generating journalism throughout the day, 24 hours a day. So what we've begun to do is have conversations with newspaper editors, television station owners, radio station owners to just see what needs do they perceive out there and whether there's a match with that. And we're seeing some early interest. I'd say that's about where we're at.
Do you think that that's going to take off?
I think it'll be enough to launch something.
When?
Probably sometime this year, we think. And the beauty of this is we're already doing this. I mean, we're already creating the journalism. We're covering the stories, et cetera. So it's not a huge investment for us. We just have to sort of shape the product to fit the needs of potential customers.
Tom, Associated Press, do you regard what CNN is attempting to launch a direct threat challenge to the AP?
Marvin, you don't have to get up very early these days to be especially paranoid. there are a lot of prospective competitors out there. And if they take a couple steps in that direction, sure. But the truth is that we have 1,000 byline stories every day from the United States, and it would be tough to replicate that. The challenge for us is to be able to maintain the sole general interest news agency out there. And we expect competition on these vertical segments, such as sports, entertainment, financial. And the truth is, whether it's CNN or the BBC or ESPN or Bloomberg, there's a lot of prospective customers, and it's not many steps from what they do to what we do in some particular area. So yes, there will be competitors. I have said before, I am pleased that they have some money to spend. That says some good things. And obviously the market for content is growing, and those strong enough to take advantage of it should.
Yeah, I was going to say, by the way, that shows you that there is a vigorous market still out there, lest we bury the profession of journalism prematurely, or the business of journalism anyway prematurely. There are customers out there.
Tom, can you tell us how the AP is doing financially?
Certainly. Last year, we had cash flow in excess of $80 million. We have, this year will be down. We have some givebacks that we've done for the newspaper industry and other contract negotiations.
What about a year before the 80 million?
We were still at about 80 million. So we've been at record levels for us. We have no debt, and we are in very good financial position. We have about 35 million in the bank, so we are okay.
Can you imagine a confluence of circumstance where new technology, dwindling revenues might make the AP a passing enterprise?
No. The demand for content is very, very strong. We have several businesses that are still growing. They're not growing. They were growing in double digits through January, and they're not growing in double digits now. Obviously, the core service that supports newspapers, local TV, and local radio is struggling. And we really should pause, though, for a second here and say, we're not the only industry suffering. And as best I can tell, with the exception of bankruptcy attorneys, everybody is going through a very miserable time. So we should not whine specifically. There are some secular changes that we're talking about. But if you go around the world, the demand for content is up, and we have a video news business. We have a software business that's still growing. We have the images still. Images. We have an archive. We have video and film that go back to 1903. We have one of the greatest collections of pictures in the history of the world. All of these things.
So 20, 30, 40 years from now, there's going to be an AP?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Alberto, there are so many ways that the public now can pick up information. Twitter is this new phenomenon.
I want you to know that we...
But maybe it's an old phenomenon by now.
No, it's a new phenomenon.
It's been 5 minutes.
Our foundation, sponsored the Shorty Awards, which is for the best use of Twitter in televised conversations in 20 different categories.
Do all of
At
the
145 characters.
No, but do all of the new technologies add to the quality of good journalism?
Of course they don't, any more than every story that was ever published or every radio program. You can't say that they all added to the quality. Some of them are going to be irresponsible, and some of them are going to be absolutely fabulous.
So what can we do about it with the irresponsible one?
I think the same thing as with newspapers. You don't read them. You don't buy them. Eventually, people figure out a way of figuring out what they trust and what they don't. We gave a grant to a fellow named Tim Berners-Lee, who is a professor at MIT. He's the fellow who happens to have actually invented the World Wide Web. Wrote the code for it. And he's concerned that the web should remain free and universal. And he thinks that the greatest danger to a free and universal web is that what he calls the lack of authenticity. So now you or I would have said, okay, then what you need is 1,000 fact checkers or 10,000 fact checkers, copy editors to check all that out. He's an engineer, and so his response is to write code so that he can deliver a program, which he's working on now, that will allow you and me and everybody else to be our own fact checkers. I think that's the way of the world. And I don't want to lose my turn talking to say that one of the things I really love about what CNN is doing is that they are one of the most open to citizen journalists with their iReports. I think this is fantastic. Is every iReport either completely accurate, vetted, great reporting? Almost certainly not. But boy, do I think that's exactly what organizations ought to be doing.
They are vetted, though.
They are.
Yeah, absolutely, before they go on CNN.
Vivian.
Yep.
My colleague at the Kennedy School at Harvard, Joe Nye, has written about the paradox of plenty. And let me quote him for a sec. A plenitude of information leads to a poverty of attention. Attention rather than information becomes the scarce resource. And those who can distinguish valuable information from background clutter gain power, unquote. How, in your view, should one begin to distinguish between the good stuff and the clutter? Do you leave it to the public? Can you help the public? What would be your sense?
Well, one thing that would help is for drive times to be longer and longer so we have people locked in their cars so they listen to NPR longer. So that helps us. That takes care of the attention problem right there. But I'm sorry, your question was about...
No, my question is,
I kept thinking about the, attention.
with all of the clutter,
Yeah.
I mean, what Joe is essentially
Yeah.
saying is that you listen constantly, and after a while you get the impression that it's all clutter. But what you should be getting is some news in there as well.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to figure out, and I really am seeking an answer, how do you help the public work its way through the clutter and get to what is substantive, get to what is news, get to what is important for them to make up their minds about it, about this country?
You know, I think underlying that question is a lack of trust or a lack of trust in the intelligence and the discerning power of the audience. I actually think that most of the listening, viewing, using audience is pretty good at discerning clutter from real stuff, and they will self-select. Of course, there are going to be people that are interested only in you know, salacious material or the kinds of things that are coming out, celebrity gossip, and that's fine. There's a place for them. I think that there's a place for everything that we've talked about. There's a place for Wikipedia. There's a place for every form of content out there. There's no bad content. But there also is tens of millions of highly intelligent news consumers who gravitate towards information that has authority, that has authenticity, that is credible. And that is why brands like NPR, like CNN, like the New York Times, like a lot of the outlets that AP serves will continue. If we can figure out how to better deliver content to them, they will stick with us. I actually have much more confidence in the audience than that.
And you believe there is no such thing as bad content? That's what you said.
Well, that's right. That's
Is
right.
that what you believe?
I don't believe. I think bad content is news and something that dresses itself up as news and pretends to be factual. But I have no problem with TMZ. I have no problem with Wikipedia. I have no problem with any of those sites. I think that it's a big tent and people have voracious appetites, and especially on the web, people are, you know, users are very promiscuous in their usage, and that's just the reality of what it is. So no, there's not bad content. There's bad content pretending to be something else.
Okay. Tom, I am old enough to remember, because I worked with them, people like Ed Murrow and Walter Cronkite, and there was no question about the trust that they engendered in the American people. The American people trusted what it is that they said. Is there the same degree of trust today? And I've got a follow-up.
Well, absolutely not.
Why?
There's no question. Well, it's been politicized for one thing. and people are pointing out the foibles. But there has been a lot of progress. When you and I were cub reporters, way
Boy, that
back,
takes us back a while, kid.
you know, it would take hours, days to get some of the information that we can get through the sources that Vivian mentioned in literally seconds and minutes. So the overall comprehensive nature of the reports today are so much better. The ability to tell the story is so much better. The fact that it can go around the world in seconds, most of the time is better, especially if the report is accurate. So there are things that are better. But clearly, the trust, the identification, the fathers knows best mentality that guided the three-screen newscasts of yesteryear, that has all changed. It's competitive, it's white-hot, competitive, and people are angry.
I must say, to listen to you, I would imagine there's no problem with journalism at all. I mean, so what are you all complaining about?
Well, it was your
Why are you
question.
talking about revenues? Why are you talking about this and that? Everything is great.
I think for the reasons that Tom was just mentioning, we have a lot to be encouraged about. What you're talking about really is democratization of media. Media has become
I know,
more...
but you use that word, and that ends up from your lips sounding as if it's perfect. It's wonderful. In a democracy, that's what you should have.
It's got a lot of potential. It's got, and we shouldn't be afraid of it. We should embrace it and figure out how our brands live in that environment. Now, I would have been really scared about 12 years ago when the web really took off, 1995, so what was that, 14 years ago? That's when at CNN, you would have thought that CNN's business model was in serious trouble, because our whole premise up till then had been you can get the news throughout the day. But the web made the news available throughout the day wherever you happened to be, as long as it was near a computer. Well, that should have killed us. And instead, 14 years later, we're the #1 news and information website online. So that sort of tells you that you can figure out a way to make a trusted brand live in this wild west of a world that discerning viewers, the ones that Vivian believes in, will find you even if they come to you from Wikipedia or from Google or other sites that don't have the imprimatur. That's all encouraging.
We had one quick postscript here. There was something about those good old days, too, that we have to remember. There were several communities which didn't get covered.
Several? Many.
Many communities that didn't get covered. Many stories, many major issues did not get coverage. We're better at that today.
And you think that you're covering all of those very important stories now?
We still have herd instinct. We still make mistakes. There are things we miss, no question about that. But we're endeavoring to do a much more comprehensive job.
I want to, hang on a second, Albert. I just want to take a moment now to remind our viewers and listeners that this is the Kalb Report. I'm Marvin Kalb, and discussing the state of American journalism with John Klein of CNN, Alberto Ibargüen of the Knight Foundation, Vivian Schiller of NPR, and Tom Curley of the Associated Press. Alberto, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's right. Just in that democratization, those communities, whether it's women, blacks, Hispanics, that didn't get covered before, didn't get covered, or were not written about in 1960, typically by women, by blacks, by Hispanics, now have access to media in a way that they simply have never had before. I also think that I agree with the comment you made about brands. I think that the younger the news user, the more likely that person is to trust somebody he or she knows. And so I think that has a lot to do with the popularity of MySpaces and Facebooks and that sort of thing. And that tends to be in almost every poll you look at. There's a greater and greater importance on knowing the source.
Understood. And let me talk a little bit about this young audience. They've all been raised in the digital age. They're skilled in acquiring information in 100 different ways. At the same time, you all are not only reaching for them, but you're trying to hold on to an older audience. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
Yes, okay. I know that you're absorbed with this. How successful are you? John, with you?
Extremely successful, because we live, we're one of the most popular brands online. So for people who access their news on the web, we're the #1 choice. For those who access their news wirelessly, we're among the very top choices. Now that's a nascent market. We have to fight to keep that foothold. But boy, that was a nice revelation when we discovered, and we didn't have a strategy to ensure this. It just happened through word of mouth probably, or because of their familiarity with our brand in other, on television and online. Now they're starting to use us on mobile devices. So we're pleased with it, and that could be a harbinger of the future. Maybe 10 years from now we'll be sitting here and my successor will be running the vast wireless empire of CNN, and TV will be a little afterthought that I'll still run.
John,
With any luck.
we may have you back in 10 years.
You'd be happy to be there.
You don't find, Vivian, any difference between the younger crowd and the older crowd and what it is that they want?
Oh,
And your
absolutely.
search? And do you feel that you're giving both audiences what they want and need?
Not completely yet. I think we're giving, as proven by our most recent audience numbers, which are just coming out today from last fall. We're at record numbers, and so we are most definitely delivering our radio audience what they want. I mean, over 27 million people tune in to NPR programming every week.
Do you know whether
It's
they're young or
extraordinary.
old?
The average age is in the upper 40s. What we've
Do you
discovered.
consider that old or young?
Well, it depends. It's about on par for the median age from my last employer. It is lower. I'm sorry to say this, John, but it's lower than the cable news network median age by about a decade. But what's happening is we've tracked it. The median age is not rising. People are aging into that medium. So that's fine. I mean, to me, if our median age was rising, then I'd think we have a problem. But the fact is people are growing into this medium. So the answer is, what do we do about the younger generation? And the answer, the way that you do it isn't that simple, but the solution is very simple, which is you have to reach the younger generation in the way they're using media today, which is not necessarily, about 40% of our audience listens to NPR programming, driving in their car, about 40% in their homes. Most younger people are not listening to radio in their homes. But if you look at our podcast median age, it's in the low to mid-30s. So that just shows that we've got to do a better. So where are we not doing as good a job? We need to do a better job in delivering NPR quality content in other formats, and that is what we're intending to do.
Alberto, how much of what we hear and see and read is noise and how much is news?
I don't think I can give you a percentage. I mean, I think it always was probably more noise. I don't know that I would have said
Always
that.
more noise?
I think so. I think if you look at how many car crashes and fires have you ever looked at in local television news? I'd say you probably didn't look at it, but the percentage, if you had looked at them all, the percentage would have been really, really high. So as Tom was suggesting, I mean, not everything was golden, not everything was perfect back then. I think, as ever, we really need to figure out how. We need to find signposts. We need to find ways for people to figure out what they value, what they don't. My concern with new media is the way that it can isolate, because it's so efficient. It's so easy for you to only listen to people who are right wing, or for you to only listen to people who are left wing. And the beauty and the thing that I'm a newspaper guy. I think and fund everything I can in new media, but my heart still belongs to the newspaper that gave a general report that was generally shared. That's really important. It was generally shared. It may not have included everybody, but it set a ground rule, it set an agenda, it defined things, and so you said, okay, that's a table. What are we going to do if we want to put something on it? And the community can then go and determine its own interest and what they want to do about it.
I want to just mention
Based on
that
shared values. Based on shared values.
that raises another question, but I just wanted to mention for all of us to know that in preparing for this program, we invited the publisher and the chief editor of the New York Times and the Washington Post, and all four of these people said that they were busy tonight, which may be the case. But that's a shame, because the newspapers are in this meltdown state right now that flies in the face of a lot of the upbeat stuff that we've been listening to up to this point on this program. And that is, for a lot of people, the heart and soul of the media. Because you wonder at a certain point, what will the media be in 10, 15 years without newspapers, or with such a reduction in the newspapers that it begins to affect the way we think about news, it begins to affect the way we think about democracy, for that matter. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, John, do you sit back from your perch, which seems a contented one at the moment from what you're telling us, do you recognize this linkage between a failing newspaper industry and the nature of journalism as we see it, understand it, and think it may be?
I think we have to let go of that. That's a big emotional connection that a lot of people feel, and it's not necessarily worthwhile.
Explain that
the
to me.
world is changing. There are many other ways evolving for humans to commit journalism. You know, journalism, it's not really a profession, it's an obsession. You know, it's not really an occupation, it's a preoccupation. The people who want, right? We would have all done it for nothing, right?
No, you would not.
We would too have. How much did you get paid for your first job? We got paid dirt, nothing. But we do it because we just love it so much. And there are still going to be people who are just dying to get out there and talk about and find out about what's going on in their communities, and they're going to have more tools at their disposal.
Have you had to fire anybody in the last year?
Sure.
How many?
Fortunately, not that many. It's close to single digits, actually.
Really?
Yeah. And that was part of the normal process of taking stock of what we really need and balancing that with where we need to be moving forward.
What about all of the other parts of the media that are losing jobs left and right? You pick up a newspaper on any given day, you're going to read about X newspaper having fired X number of people.
I want to take a slightly counter point of view to John's, having, you know, just recently left the New York Times, and I still feel New York Times in my bloodstream and probably always will. I agree that we need to let go of a love of newsprint. I think that that is not necessarily, I mean, I personally, even though I was running the New York Times website, I did during that entire time and still do read the New York Times in print every day, but I guess that makes me a dinosaur. But I agree that we do need to let that go. But what newspapers have, and unfortunately I think that the business model perhaps is just going to be unsustainable going forward, that I don't see existing really very well in any other media, is true, in-depth, enterprise and investigative reporting. There are pockets of it. There's no question there are pockets of it. You guys do, at CNN, do a little bit. We do a very little bit. There are, of course, some wonderful television programs like 60 Minutes, like Frontline, and some online investigative reporting. But I really fear for the absence of that and worry that other news media, the expense of that type of reporting that newspapers really have dominated, not just in national newspapers, but on the local level, that going away is a truly frightening proposition that I think we all need to grapple with.
I don't think you even need to go to the national reporting. I've mainly worked in local newspapers, and think about what the food pages of a local newspaper did. They told you not just recipes, they told you about neighbors. They told you about people who came from other places, who did interesting things, who had different sets of beliefs. And this is also part of what a newspaper used to do. And it was a shared, it helped to share values. I think what we need to be doing now, though, is experimenting to figure out how to deliver that going forward, rather than bemoan the fact that print is leaving us. I think local radio, local television, and local newspapers have all significantly withdrawn from, or are significantly diminished And maybe for the first time in the history of the Republic, while we're living in this information paradox that you referenced earlier, we have more data, more information than we've ever had before, but we might well know more about the fact that there's a crisis in Darfur than about what the Board of Education did
And you
this
may
week.
know less, as a matter of fact, because there is a tendency in cable news and the tendency on talk radio to go with stories hour after hour, sometimes week after week, and it becomes a soap opera. Each story becomes its own massive Gone with the Wind. And at a certain point, you only have a certain amount of time. And if you at CNN or Fox or MSNBC spend an enormous amount of time working on one story, you then deny to the public what they might have got of a very serious nature, by the way, if you had used a different set of judgments on the news. And I'm just wondering, John, from your point of view, are you worried that in an obsessive way dealing with one story that you are not covering, you cut off the time when you could be covering other things, like, for example, an invasion of Iraq, like, for example, an oncoming economic meltdown?
Sure, and our entire strategy is built upon that concern. We don't report on...
What are you doing about that?
We don't report on Natalie Holloway anymore, for example. We let the other networks... We looked around. I came in 4 years ago, and we looked around at the landscape, and we said, boy, the other, to Vivian's point about new opinion or crap masquerading as news, I mean, we looked around, we saw, boy, they're called news channels, but a lot of these so-called news channels aren't really covering anything that's that important or worth anybody knowing. What if we were to cover that? What if we were to fill that niche and cover the real news? Well, P.S., I mean, it takes a while to line your troops up behind that, because keep in mind, that's a new habit for folks, who had been used to covering stories in a certain way. But 4 years later, we owned television election coverage. We not only beat the other cable networks, we beat the broadcast networks, because we devoted ourselves to covering the campaign in terms of the substance of the issues and who were these people and what were they going to do as president. And we studiously tried to avoid the food fight du jour. And now we're trying to carry that over into our coverage of the economy. Last week we devoted the entire week to our Road to Rescue coverage as an exercise almost for our own staff at what is it like when you eschew and avoid those other subjects that just don't matter as much. It's working for us.
Go ahead, Albert.
Marvin, if I could, every one of the newspapers you mentioned earlier are local papers. There's some major metros involved. The ones that
Chicago, L.A., not bad.
Well, that are in bankruptcy, and they are the source of information for Los Angeles. They're the source of information for Denver. If you look at Boston, it's all the same. So when those go, who is going to provide that bonding information? Who is going to provide the information where democracy actually lives, where you actually are structuring, have structured the democracy? And that's my point about, for the first time in the history of the Republic, I think, we're delivering information in a way that is not consistent with the way we've structured democracy. We have either a global web, or we have national organizations that deliver whatever the kind of national news, whether good, bad, or indifferent, but nevertheless still taking a national perspective. But those newspapers that you mentioned were the ones that looked at mayors, looked at congresspeople, looked at councilmen and women, and that is happening shamefully less and less, even without going to bankruptcy.
And state capitals are no longer being covered.
Absolutely.
And what you've got now is not the rich coverage of a rich democracy. The democracy, I hope, continues to be rich, but the coverage isn't. And Tom, you've been at this for a while. Are you not concerned that we are reaching a point where newspapers get thinner, not just literally thinner, but thinner in content, where you come upon a situation where ABC News strikes a deal with the BBC to cover Iraq, for example, and other places in the Middle East, where on NPR you will as frequently come upon a British accent as opposed to an American reporter covering a story, which is an interesting question as to why.
But they might be an NPR reporter with a British accent.
That is correct. That's,
Okay.
no, that's what
Yeah.
I'm getting at. Why? But I'm asking Tom this because of sort of perspective on this issue. Do you sit there with the comfort that I am sensing here when so much of this industry is in pain?
No, you can't sit here and be comfortable with what's going on, but it's also no time to cry wolf and unduly punish ourselves. There are some tremendous opportunities in the coverage area. We have expanded international coverage because of some of the cutbacks elsewhere. We take our duties and our mission even more seriously than we did before. Now, on the state coverage and local and regional, first of all, Alberto has been part of something that's been very special to try to understand this, and he's put some serious dollars behind filling out some of these content niches. But I'm also seeing this come from the private sector now. If we are stupid in what we fail to cover, if we make bad decisions, I have confidence, going back to what Vivian said earlier, that somebody is going to fill it in. It's not going to immediately be along the lines that it used to be, but it will be, it's a gap that will be closed.
But will this someone be a trained journalist who is there to cover news, understands the difference between opinion and the acquisition of hard information?
Yes. There are many
But
people...
we're firing people left and right.
That's true, but there are many people out there with expertise in given areas and who have a passion about it. You start to see it happen on the state level. You know, people care about the news. They are engaging with news in a way that they have not for decades. We're seeing it at all levels, local, state, national, and internationally. And if we make the wrong decisions, those gaps will be closed. Not overnight, not exactly in the same way. But I also need to pause here and say something, since I do have a feeling the panel buried print. And I want to make the case that there will be print with us for decades. And some of the newspapers that you mentioned will be smaller, but I do believe they will be doing at least as much investigative or context reporting as they do now, and probably more, because some of the breaking news function might go elsewhere to the BlackBerry devices and mobile devices and other ways that news gets covered. But there will be other new players, new entrants. There will be more free newspapers, and many of them may be targeted at things such as entertainment, but also around issues. So I think you'll see more media, for better or worse, but I think the opportunity is for people to go out and start things. There is private equity money forming around filling some of those content gaps, and I believe over the next 4 to 6 weeks you'll see some announcements about online journalism and a new age of funding.
Alberto, do you believe that foundations like the Knight Foundation can join up with other foundations and become the source of the resources necessary to either help existing news organizations or create new ones?
I think probably the short answer is no. I don't think there's nearly enough money. I think you have to look for the kind of private investment that Tom was just talking about. I do think that foundations, and I wish there were more foundations, like the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation. Carnegie is involved to some extent, Ford is involved to some extent, MacArthur is involved to some extent, and certainly that's one of our main missions. But there's not nearly enough money. What we should be doing is funding experiments. I think what Tom just laid out, a scenario where you could go in 100 different directions, depending on which kinds of experiments, whether you go with mobile telephony, or if you go with other kinds of wireless. It really depends. It really will affect the nature of the business. We need to fund those experiments, and then I really look forward to the day when we have some sense of how people want to receive their news, and then at that point, Knight Foundation and others can then step back and start funding best practices again. We used to be the main funder of journalism programs. We stopped funding a lot of those programs, well, for the simple reason that you're going to teach best practices for a world you can't define. And so we'd better figure out how folks want to get, we've hardly touched on telephony, and I think that if you think the medium is the message with a computer, wait till you try to figure out the delivery of news on a cell phone as the main source for an entire country.
Just quick context, to fund the non-profit part of AP, the base news agency, would take $6 billion. Alberto, how much do you have?
I'll put in a third. And then
This program is going to come to a close in about 5 minutes or so, but I wanted to use the remaining time to point out to you the obvious, which is that our audience is composed of a lot of young, aspiring reporters. And I would like to tell them certain things based on your own experience. And start with you, Vivian. What is the most important thing that you could point out to someone who is not yet in the business but looks toward work in it?
I would encourage them to go. You know, I'm fearful when I hear people who are thinking about journalism going, oh, there's no jobs, people are getting laid off, I'm not going to go into journalism. That scares me to death. We need everybody in this room, every student in this room to be committed to a career in journalism, because I'm sorry if I can speak on behalf of all my panelists, we're too old to figure out what the next delivery method is going to be. I'm sorry, but it's true. We are. So we need you guys to figure it out. And so we need you to understand deeply the fundamentals of good journalism. We need deep news literacy in this country so that you carry the good habits forward and bring it into new platforms and new ways of telling the news.
John, listening to all of you, I would say that it's an open question as to whether the old values of journalism, those that I was raised on, you were raised on, whether they'll still be around in 10 years, and in what form.
Well, I think the audience is going to demand that those values are preserved because they demand accuracy above all else. They want to know that what they're reading or watching or listening to is for real and that they can count on it. And by the way, I would urge these guys in school to only go into it if you would do it for nothing, because that's what will keep you driving. I mean, you'll probably get paid, but it's what keeps me going every day is that I love it. It's just so much fun, and every day is different, and you have the urge, and you can't help it. And that's what a journalist is, whatever vehicle happens to distribute the information you gather.
Hey, John, you could contribute your annual salary. Tom, do you think that journalism schools are places where young journalists should go to pick up some of these value systems and technique?
Well, absolutely. They still teach communication, they still teach storytelling. These are skills that can be used in any profession, but I also think our profession is going to undergo some enormous growth after we get through this valley. So I would not give up on it. I think John is right. You do need to be flexible about how you're going to eat for a period of time. And you make no bones about it. The next couple of years are going to be tough. But I would not give up on it. The opportunities abound.
Okay. And Alberto, what about the watchdog role of journalism? Do you see it in this new world of connectivity, if there's such a word?
Absolutely.
You see the watchdog part of it.
The Voice of San Diego, an online publication, I'll call it, an online news operation, breaks as much in San Diego as the newspaper in San Diego does. This is something, I mean, whenever I go through the airport in Miami, which is every week, I think about what my old newspaper, the Miami Herald, did. to expose corruption, to show the kinds of problems that we were having back at that point. And I think not only is it fun, not only is it fun to find out stuff and tell it in a compelling way, but it's also important. It also really matters to the community. The community is better. We have a better airport. We have a better school system. We have a better whatever it happens to be. And I don't see any reason why that should only be thought about on paper.
We're not being naively Pollyanna. We can't afford to be. You're hearing people who are engaged every day in figuring out how to continue growing our businesses, and this is the direction that we're going. We believe in it.
And journalism will continue more or less in a recognizable shape?
I think that's a big maybe.
That's a big maybe.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because it may not be recognizable.
I don't know what we're going to look at as journalism. I think figuring out the truth is always going to be important.
It depends on what you consider this.
I know what I consider that. But in any
All the
case...
stories and pictures and video you need right here. You know, I traveled through the Mideast this fall.
Tom, our time's up. You've heard that phrase before. I want to thank, first of all, our wonderful audience. You've really been terrific. But most important, I want to thank our panelists who have been absolutely splendid in defending your point of view. And John Klein, Alberto Ibargo, and Vivian Schiller, and Tom Curley. I'm Marvin Kalb. And to all of you out there who still cherish a free press and a free society, stick to it, fight for it. Good night and good luck. Thank you.